We are going to go after the CDL mills that are issuing licenses across the country.
And as the administrator of FMCSA, I want to make this perfectly clear to the driver training schools. If you are not following the rules and you're not doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, we're going to ensure that we put you out of business. We're going to come after you.
That was Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, followed by FMCSA Administrator Derek Bars in a news conference last week, talking about the so-called CDL mills that churn out CDLs to unqualified drivers with little to no regard for safety standards. It's a commitment to driver training standards from the USDOT that, frankly, we haven't really seen before. One group, of course, cheering the move is OOIDA, which has long advocated for increased driver training standards. Another is the Commercial Vehicle Training Association. And with the conversations around driver training heating up, we thought it might be a good idea to bring in Andrew Poliakoff and Jeff Burkhardt. Andrew is Executive Director of CVTA, again, the Commercial Vehicle Training Association. Jeff is Chairman of the board, and both agree that the momentum we're seeing right now is long overdue. Let's get to it. So Andrew, Jeff, thanks for joining us. Lots to talk about. I almost don't know where to start here, but let's start with a simple one. And Andrew, we'll start with you here. First and foremost, for those who may not be familiar with what the Commercial Vehicle Training Association is, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much for having us on. Really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. So my name is Andrew Poliakoff. I'm the Executive Director of the Commercial Vehicle Training Association, CVTA. We're the largest association of professional truck driver training programs in the United States. We have members in 46 states that, with around 400 locations all over the nation, that train over 100,000 entry-level drivers each year. So really focused, as we have been on coming up on our 30th anniversary, we've been focused for decades on creating greater opportunities in the trucking industry for new drivers and on safety. Those two goals, work in tandem.
Yeah. And Jeff, you're the chairman of the board for CVTA. That's not your day job, though. I know you do something else, right?
Yes. Thank you also, Scott, for having me on. My name is Jeff Burkhardt. I am the chairman of the board, a privileged position to hold that for the CVTA. My day job, so to speak, perfectly described by you. I'm the Senior Director of Operations for the Commercial Driver Training Program for Ancora Education and Ancora Training, which is a vertical under the same umbrella. So just real quick, we are a post-secondary institution of higher education. We're based in Arlington, Texas. We have multiple ground campuses that have CDL entry-level driver training as one of our programs to offer. And then we have within Ancora Training our service provider vertical, if you will, to where we're contracted ELDT providers for certain entities, community colleges, businesses, et cetera, and many locations across the country, probably about 100.
Yeah. And you guys are busy these days. And one of the reasons we reached out to you is all the conversations of late about non-domiciled CDLs, English language proficiency. It's kind of leading us down a path to looking at where training requirements are right now, training standards, licensing standards, so on and so forth. OIDA has recently really been ringing this bell and trying to get some attention on the issue because it does feel like we have some momentum on it here. You both are obviously uniquely qualified to talk about this. I want to start here with kind of a big picture question, if we could. And this is a loaded question, so I'll just kind of preface it by saying that. But Jeff, we can start with you here. When you look at the current state of commercial vehicle driver training in the United States, where are we? And are we close to where you would like to see us be? So I'm asking you basically the current state of things as you see it.
Boy, that is a big question,
Yeah.
But you're right, Scott. It's absolutely pertinent. Not to go through a deep dive of entire history, but as far as entry-level driver training requirements, those were originally supposed to be implemented in February of 2020, and they were implemented almost 4 years ago now in 2022. But long story short, the FMCSA, and after, negotiating rulemaking and all the other, machinations that are involved with producing these types of things, they came out with the regulated program and the requirements. So our schools and all of those that are members of the CVTA, we were prepared then. We were prepared in 2022, and we've been compliantly executing those requirements ever since. So in that regard, in terms of the question, we are in a good position. But that is predicated on the good actors, which is a term that's been floating around, bad actors, good actors.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just cut to the chase. The folks that are doing it right, the training providers that are doing it right, and I don't use schools necessarily in that term. I intentionally use training providers on the Training Provider Registry. We're doing it right. Our focus now is pretty much in line with what we've been hearing from the FMCSA lately, and we've been pushing this for quite a while, not just in 2025. This has been ongoing since 2022 when we realized there were gaps in the enforcement of the Training Provider Registry. Our focus is on enforcement of the existing regulations that are pretty tight. They account for state certifications. They have, you need to be compliant to the ELDT regulations that are all clearly stated. There's a proliferation of bad actors that are on the Training Provider Registry that by definition are not doing what they're supposed to do. And I think that if the enforcement of that will go a super long way in cleaning up the industry, the training sector, I'll call it, and make sure that the compliant folks are able to do what we've continued to do all along, and those who are circumventing the regulations and the fly-by-nighters and the substandard training, quote-unquote, providers, they need to go by the wayside. They need to be held accountable and not be in business any longer.
That's what was so exciting, frankly, about yesterday's press conference with Secretary Duffy and Administrator Bars, the new administrator of the FMCSA. Really strong language, really for the first time coming out of FMCSA and USDOT. I think it's from the perspective of all of the folks that have been doing hard work in the CVTA community, and especially, CVTA convened this ELDT task force really right as ELDT became enforceable federal law in February of 2022, and saying like, wait, we're seeing a proliferation of bad actors and we're not seeing enforcement. And we have been banging that drum for greater enforcement for years now. It was extremely validating yesterday to hear Secretary Duffy and Administrator Bars, talking and elevating the importance of ELDT enforcement onto that national stage. I mean, we have great partners at the FMCSA that we've been working diligently with, for years, but it has not hit the urgency pitch that we had wanted. And it's in that space now. And, I think it's sort of tragically, it's in that space because of what you mentioned earlier, Scott, these, the notable things that have led us to the non-domiciled CDL, interim final rule, and some of these other changes. But, I think from CVTA's perspective, although there are all of these, there's always the possibility for this system to be working correctly. That's the positive. The negative is that it hasn't. But I think we're excited to see that we're in a place now where, the urgency and enforcement is hopefully going to pick up, and we look forward to, at CVTA, as we always been, to leading that charge.
Yeah, and you guys have been at this longer than I have, but when I hear the FMCSA Administrator Derek Bars in that news conference, essentially, and it's not even essentially, he sent a warning to these so-called CDL mills, telling them, if they're not following the rules, they're going to get shut down. Secretary Duffy, had some strong language too, and basically saying that, if you're not following the rules with training standards, you're going to face some consequences here. Again, you guys have been at this longer than I have, but Andrew, I can't recall a time where we've had such high-ranking officials come out and explicitly say that this is going to be a focus, that we are going to try and clean up this situation that's out there that a lot of people are taking advantage of. For someone like you guys and all of your training schools doing things the right way, I would imagine that's it's refreshing to hear that from someone at that level.
Refreshing, frankly, would just be an understatement.
Yeah,
to see if I had not experienced the last couple of months in person, I would think I was almost sort of dreaming to see the Secretary of Transportation and the Administrator having a joint press conference where ELDT was the focus, and where statements like, quote, "we're going to come after you," end quote, were what were being said. I mean, it just was extraordinarily validating. And, there's the side of this where it's like you have eager folks who want this to believe in the stream of becoming a trucker and want to take this on as a career. And they're going and finding these just places that these training providers that just absolutely pervert that goal. 2-day training, 3-day training. Yeah. But if you've never encountered this industry before, you don't know that 3-day training is this, aberration.
That's
you
insane.
Don't know.
It's insane if you just think about it for a second. It's insane just to realize there are schools that are claiming that and doing that.
Yeah. And you could find them online right now. And these are just the ones that are brazen enough to even say 3-day training. But that doesn't mean that there isn't just this entire segment of folks that are doing that and intelligent enough to not telegraph it. But it's an extraordinary moment. There's still plenty of work that needs to be done. It's sort of the devil in the details there, and we can get into that in greater detail. But it's extraordinary.
Jeff, I imagine your reaction was pretty much the same.
Oh, absolutely. We obviously these last 10 months, for a whole host of reasons, has seen unprecedented activities across the federal government. But speaking specifically about our sector of transportation and training, very strong words yesterday, and I really love the fact that they were honing in on It's important to know these are existing regulations. English language proficiency was not new, as just one example. So whereas some people may have some trepidation or think that the wholesale changes are needed, that is not the case here. Simply enforcing existing regulations and getting tough in the areas and on the people and the companies that deserved a little bit of toughness, to be frank with you, Scott. So, I was fully welcome the messaging that came from the secretary and the administrator yesterday.
And Jeff, we have these discussions from time to time with tow companies or brokers, who are doing things the right way. And the honest ones will tell us all the time that they do want enforcement of these regulations, obviously looking at different ones for those sectors, but they want enforcement. They want stronger regulations in effect because, and you both mentioned that phrase there, bad actors. The bad actors in the industry are impacting them, the honest ones, in a negative way as well. I imagine, Jeff, that resonates with you because, again, you both brought up this bad actor aspect of this, and there are a lot of them out there that are doing harm to pretty much everybody across the board.
Absolutely, and that is one of the many unfortunate consequences of this entire discussion. The folks that are doing it right, the owner-operators, independent drivers, the company drivers, the company's employers themselves, the training schools, everybody that's doing it right are doing so for the greater good, not just for the business. That is true, but it is because it's in the spirit of ELDT. And that what I mean by that is to have safe and compliant drivers on the nation's roads. And whenever we have these tragedies and other things and some of the bluster that may go along with them, then it casts a shadow. And that is something that we are keenly aware of, and we want to make sure that we approach this in parallel. We not only want to defend and advocate and push for enforcement of existing regulations, but just as importantly, we want to make sure that the message doesn't somehow get lost that is trucking really, for me, type of a question. We all experienced some very positive press, so to speak, during COVID. We all knew that this was an essential job and it's a fantastic career to be involved in, whether you be a company driver or you're an owner-operator and you're out there and doing your thing. We know it's a fantastic career. But we also definitely are cognizant to where some of these bad stories can cast a shadow. So we're definitely pushing to make sure that does not get lost in the shuffle here. Let's keep these things separate. This is obviously, certainly, a high demand and very, very rewarding career path to follow. But we need to enforce it. We need to enforce the regulations that are on the books so that it will continue to be that way with the next generation of drivers that come up, as well as the existing drivers that are out there that should be protected. and not be cast in a bad light just because of the bad actors.
Yeah. Let's talk entry-level driver training standards and kind of about how we got here. Speaking of loaded questions, I think that's probably one as well. But Andrew, I believe you have set a minimum standard for your members requiring that they provide at least 30 hours of behind-the-wheel training. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, speaking of insanity, it is insane to me that is not a requirement across the board. Why do you do that there at CVTA? Because again, that kind of goes above and beyond what the rules and regulations are calling for.
Well, so a lot of what we do at CVTA, in order to become a member, you need to go through our oversight committee, right? And so organizations are evaluated on a host of criteria, right? You're talking about their curriculum, all of their activities. I mean, we conduct interviews with these folks before they become school members, right? And so that's simply one of the data points that we've examined and sort of has grown over time through an understanding of what really has been a part of this safe and high quality training. But I think when we look at why that's not in the final rule, that's probably something that is up for discussion. I think when we look at changes to ELDT and why we have not really pressed for any changes to ELDT, we look at this sort of, and we've all sort of alluded to it, this tortured history of what it took to get from congressional statutory action to create ELDT into the final rule. Like this was, ELDT began to take shape in 2012 as part of MAP 21, that transportation bill. Then some years later, you have the FAST Act in 2015, which says, hey, FMCSA, no, really do this, right? And it's not until, essentially 10 years after that you get the LTAC convening, right? And then 6 years after that you get, the actual enforceable law. So I think it's, we do that for the purpose of evaluating that along other data points. And I think, people have pushed for that. I know we've had great conversations. We've worked together, trying to, support anything that will get this law enforced properly. We've worked with, our good friends at OIDA on that as well. But it's really, I think, critical that, we're looking at that as congressional action. And no offense to any congressional staffers or anyone else listening, but, congressional action in the regulatory space is, I think, from an oversight perspective, super, super important. In terms of going back to the rule itself, not something that we're targeting immediately.
Yeah. Jeff, can we talk about the behind the wheel training a little bit? Because again, you putting that standard in place for your members, I think is important in that it, is essentially making sure that folks who are behind the wheel, on our public roadways have been given the proper training. Can you talk a little bit about the training aspect of this and how important that is for someone who is going to be out there with a CDL to, actually have been given the training behind the wheel like that?
Certainly. As far as ELDT goes and the formal requirements of it, we're fully embraced all of those in the theory component. We're talking about all those subjects, that everything from regulations to, driving conditions and the importance of a numerous subjects. When we get to the behind the wheel component, that's where we're focused on how to inspect, back, and drive a CMV. In other words, as training providers, the primary goal is to teach students how to do those three things effectively and safely so that they can pass the skills test. So it's kind of the definition of entry-level driver training. But I think it's also important to note, Scott, that our schools, and I can speak for many, many schools, certainly the good actors, it's not just limited to those three things, how to inspect, back, and drive. Those are the components of a skills test. We introduce them to real-life scenarios. In other words, we do not constrain ourselves just to going around in circles on a giant, training range. We are in the environment where these drivers are eventually going to be, earning their livelihood. We're training on back roads, we're rural, highway, interstate, city. We're going through truck stops and rest areas and way stations. In other words, we can meet the requirements of ELDT, which are minimum, But we can also do that while introducing them to real-world applications, because we feel that is the responsible thing to do. It provides for a better learning environment. It's real life. It best prepares those students for the real-life applications once they're out there behind the wheel themselves and in scenarios they can find themselves in. So I think the behind the wheel training, it should incorporate all of that. And that is certainly, what we do. And I'm speaking for the compliant ones and the properly operated schools.
Andrew, I think you pinpointed part of the problem earlier when you talked about the legislative process and just how long it takes for things like ELDT to actually go into effect. That timeline that you mentioned there was more than 10 years, I think. So it takes time, and that's the frustrating thing about the legislative process, generally speaking. But when you look at the training standards as they stand right now, and again, we're talking minimum training standards, and when you look at what you are doing now and what your members are doing, there's a divide there because you're going above and beyond. Would you like to see those requirements, boosted, the minimum requirements boosted to where they are closer to what you all are doing? Would you like to see them go even further? I guess if you were the czar of this and, we gave you a magic wand or whatever, what would that look like?
The ELDT czar?
The ELDT czar. I like it.
Do I get a special hat?
We'll give you a special hat. We'll let you design it and everything. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, look, I think it's really difficult to look that far down the road. And it's really 14 years to be exact, right? From MAP 21 to where we are. And I think it's a fair question. I think, any living, breathing community, CVTA is a community of, individuals that all come together for great training. And we want to support great training, wherever that is, right? But I think from our perspective, we have, and our task force and the whole community has just been hyper-focused on, avoiding anything that's going to, I'll say it plainly, right? We have avoided attempting to do things that would require, laborious long-term rulemakings, even in the regulatory space. So the idea of creating something that's a congressional fix, oh boy, I'm going to need a time machine to benefit from that. You know what I mean? So we're so hyper-focused on that. It's difficult to say, how do we, when we have, board meetings and calls and all these things, and somebody starts talking about changing ELDT, statutorily with Congress, I'm like, no. Let's just rein this back in. Yeah.
Jeff, Andrew has been term limited out for ELDT czar.
Right.
You're taking over.
Right. Okay.
What's on your wish list?
Termed out.
He's
my
term
wish
limited.
List,
yep.
I think it's term limited. Well, number one, it's going to be enforcement, and that's got to happen right away. If I were to use a football analogy, I don't think, it's okay to be thinking about your goal line offense, but whenever you're back behind your own 20 right after the kickoff, I think we need to face what's right in front of us first. So if I were the ELDT, czar, FMCSA czar, I would basically align myself almost with what was said yesterday, and that is enforcement, first and foremost. Now, running parallel with that does not mean that I would accept that everything that's currently in place is evergreen and it is the best way to go. As with any particular subject or sector, there is some fluidity. Conditions change. Some things happen that were discovered post inception or post implementation of a particular product. And when we're talking about federal level government, well, that's an understatement in terms of discoverables after implementation. So I think it's healthy to have the specific stakeholders be involved in any particular subject. So it'd be similar to whenever ELDT was first devised years ago, and then take a holistic look at everything that is within. AMBA very recently changed the skills test.
Yeah.
For them, it was science-based. It was do analysis of causation and accidents and things like that. So they made changes to the skills test. Those changes have been in place, the original test has been in place for many years. So that's just one example of how conditions change, data and things of that nature, research changes, and then by virtue of that, it should be reviewed.
What about
and
Jeff?
that data?
Oh, go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
One thing I'll say super quickly is, that's why we've been, I think the data is important there. And one of the first things we said to FMCSA about this is like, hey, we understand, and I don't know if they're doing it anymore, if it's been sort of timed out for a bit. I hope they start it back up. But, doing research on, ELDT training outcomes, that's going to be important information. But if you have thousands upon thousands of, bad actors in the system producing bad data, you need to omit that before you can do any research of any note. Anyway, I'm sorry, I stepped on Jeff or your next.
No. I was just going to ask you real quick, again, with just kind of putting a bow on this czar thing, just real quick, if you were to set minimum requirements for behind the wheel training, what would that look like? And you don't have to give a very long answer necessarily, but Andrew, what would that look like for you if you could set the minimum?
It's a difficult question to answer, I think, with what we're focused on right now in terms of enforcement.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff, do you have a countering thought or a thought on that?
For me, I would like to incorporate the modernized skills test because some of those maneuvers there are not currently in the behind the wheel requirements. So I think it would fall in line. I think we should retain the ones that are currently there in terms of those backing maneuvers as well as on the road. But I think we should incorporate the modernized skills test because we're talking about the here and now. And I think that we need to be a little bit more nimble. When I say we, I'm actually referring to the federal government, the FMCSA in this case, and be a little bit more nimble in terms of making adjustments for those topics that have, a lot of research and a lot of quantified data behind them. And that's just one example there.
And we are speaking with Andrew Poliakoff and Jeff Burkhardt of CVTA, the Commercial Vehicle Training Association. Speaking of momentum, OOIDA has been calling on FMCSA to utilize the Training Provider Registry to remove bad actors. I know this is something that you all have been calling on FMCSA to kind of clamp down on as well. And we've actually seen the agency, again, looking at momentum here, we've seen the agency do a little bit more of this in recent days. Jeff, with regard to the Training Provider Registry, can you explain your concerns there, recommendations? What are you seeing there that raises alarm bells for you?
For me, it is I'll call it a low threshold for acceptance. And what I mean by that, Scott, is that it is a self-certification model. Now, I will quickly say that, for the bad actors, by definition, they're not going to be too concerned with the penalties and consequences and all the attestations that any training provider must make on the website whenever they want to have their location or their school added to the Training Provider Registry. Enforcement, and yes, I'm being totally redundant because it's applicable here. If everything that has faced a training provider that wants to be out on that TPR were enforced, that in and of itself is going to eliminate a vast majority of the bad actors. So again, enforcement is the word of the day, and for the CVTA, it's been the word for years, for that matter. The other part, though, is yes, we have seen some activities on the TPR. To date, there's been 247 training providers removed from the TPR. Well, if you got to keep that into perspective, that's out of thousands, tens of thousands of training providers that are currently on that Training Provider Registry. And a lot of those, a majority of them, in fact, train publicly. They train the public consumer. These are not all just employer-based internal training programs. So that is of great concern. Consumers are getting fleeced. They're getting substandard training. My schools and many within the CVTA, we have enrolled people who have literally come from a bad actor so that they can receive proper training and go get their skills test and move on to the career path that they want to. So for me, those are the main concerns. And of those 247 that have been removed, Scott, I think it's also important to dig a little bit deeper. A lot of those are voluntary removals. A lot of those are going to be just by virtue of administrative. You have schools training providers that are just no longer in business, or they're just no longer doing any training, either or. And so their recertification lapses by virtue of them not doing it any longer.
Yeah.
Well, that nobody should be hanging their hat or, with all due respect, patting themselves on the back too much for that. That is just an incidental removal. We want true enforcement. Go after the bad actors. A majority of the states already regulate CDL training providers within their state. And just by virtue of that, I dare say that there's already a finite data set, a list of approved training providers within a given state that could simply be the cross-reference point as far as who should be on the TPR. So again, it all revolves around enforcement as far as I'm concerned, Scott.
That's what got CBTA's task force so animated, I think, especially into 2023. We had leveraged a lot of relationships, not leveraged, but we had done a lot of outreach to these state driver's license agencies, the SDLAs, saying, hey, ELDT is coming, state partners, we're going to need you to, really have a line of communication to FMCSA. FMCSA is going to be ready to remove these bad actors when you report them. If they're not licensed in your state or if they're up to no good, use states are the first line of defense. And then we leveraged all of that activity and advocacy to the SDLAs, and the SDLAs were ready to go and started, reporting these bad actors and unlicensed entities to the FMCSA, and crickets, just full on crickets. And so the states are going, well, it's not like we're walking around here with tons of bandwidth to do this anyway. So on to the next thing, right? Yeah. And we've had some extraordinary partners in the state space. Big shout out to Pennsylvania. I mean, look, Pennsylvania has been, you want to talk about having the receipts. I mean, we are, aware of communications that they have with FMCSA saying like, hey, the state of Pennsylvania has, issued cease and desist letters to this training provider that's been literally on record, under oath saying that they don't do this, they don't comply with the ELDT requirements, et cetera, and they can't get the federal government to remove them from the TPR. So it's like the FMCSA has become like almost some sort of odd defense counsel for these bad actors, like taking the word of some training provider over the state of Pennsylvania, like just stuff that you can't even understand. And so it'd be easy to arrive at looking at this registry and go, oh, they've removed some people. Oh, this is impressive here and there. There's 2,600 that are listed in pending removal. That's hopeful. Yeah, a bit, but a lot of those, as Jeff mentioned, are quasi-administrative. People not renewing their biennial recertification or re-registration elements. But behind the scenes, you see these states that are hopping mad, saying, "What is going on? We have told you, we've been trying to get you to remove, these folks for years, and they're still on here." That's what we see.
That's insane. It just is insane. And you're describing perfectly a dysfunctional system. And I don't think that's a leap to call it that. However, again, it does feel like a page is turning, and it feels like the people that should have been paying attention to this and should be paying attention to this are finally getting the message. Is that right, Andrew?
Absolutely. And, I had the great fortune to encounter Secretary Duffy at National Truck Driver Appreciation Week in New Jersey at a truck stop. He's what a just a leader in this space, I think. And obviously, Chief Administrator Barrs with his law enforcement background. You got the right people there, right? And so I was talking to Secretary Duffy about this. Had 5 or 6 minutes of his time. It was amazing to describe this to him. And then there was a press conference, so his response, I mean, he's a person really acquainted with this industry, and, just sort of see the secretary himself sort of in real time going, wait a second. Because at that time, especially, was really hyper focused on English language proficiency and on non-domiciled CDLs. And those are quite relevant. Don't get me wrong, extremely so. But, to see him go, in the press conference, you see him in real time being like, how is it that someone that can't even speak, English can get past their skills test? And I'm like watching this press conference says, yes, that's a great question. Like, we just want you to ask the question even one layer back in the food chain is, how did that person even get entered onto the TPR? Because if their information was entered onto the TPR, that means they can go sit for the skills test. If that's not been entered, they can't even sit for it. So but you're right though. We're turning a page. We want to give credit where credit's due. We have seen, we saw a jump of almost 150, removals. Not all of those. The vast majority of those are not, due to substantive analysis of violations, but many of them are. So credit where credit's due, and also the tenacity, I think, and urgency that you see in a press conference like yesterday. That's something that we may not. The team might not be running all the right plays yet, but boy, oh boy, do we have the right people on the team.
Yeah. Well, and it's going to take a while too for them to. It has taken, and understandably, it's taken them a little while to understand the lay of the land. Secretary Duffy came in, but we've seen action on these issues happen incredibly quickly. Obviously, again, it's going to take some time for this to kind of get fixed over time. But another thing, we also had. I wanted to bring this up with you guys too. A 51 count indictment in New York, I think a couple weeks back, in which the DMV employees there, some of them are accused of falsifying CDL permit tests in exchange for bribes. We see these stories from time to time. You use that case as an opportunity to renew a call for a broader adoption of third-party CDL testing across all states. And Jeff, I think we can start with you maybe. Talk a little bit about that and the concerns that CVTA has with that as well.
Yeah, that was quite an eye-opener there. Yeah. But I'm not saying that it was shocking, only because there is a longer history in Massachusetts, for example, and that was state troopers were involved. I mean, me personally, and not just me personally, but I think a lot of folks hold those folks in extremely high regard for good reason. So, again, not holding them all accountable or doesn't cast a shadow on all troopers by any stretch, but it's just another example of one should not automatically interpret that the state level examiners or functions are above reproach. There have been deficiencies realized. It ties into enforcement. And in Cora, we have third-party testing in multiple states and examiners, as do many schools of the CVTA. We are held to an extremely high regard with audits, covert audits, scheduled audits, reviewing the student test files, reviewing the actual testing. Our examiners are in place with a DOT and or state level official to co-score a test. Now, these things can similarly be done at the state level, but one thing is for certain, every third-party testing entity, all of those examiners are CDL holders. That same statement cannot be said of the State Driver's License Association, agency examiners. Now, that's not to throw shade as far as all of those folks by any stretch, but I'm just stating the fact that there is a difference between the two. And I am fully confident that the third-party testing, not just the approving bodies, which are state level, but the ones that are out there, and yes, there are some bad actors, and yes, there are many that have been held to account, and that is a good thing. But we are held at a very high regard, and I think due to that is those mechanisms and that structure by which we are all operating under, that it is a supplement, a complement to the state licensing authorities in order to eliminate or minimize skills testing delays and things of that nature. So I definitely think that the two can coexist, and in many states they do. In some, it's one or the other. But I'm a firm proponent or an advocate of third-party testing, and along with that, the high degree of oversight that goes with it. If you're a good actor, you're doing what you're supposed to do, you have no worries.
Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, that's a place where, there's an indicator or evidence of how an enforced rule is working properly, right? We saw at CVTA for many years, and you see in some states that don't utilize third-party testing, at times you'll see these skills testing delays, and those are a real problem, right? Getting back to the student, you have folks that are, at many times sort of moving heaven and earth, either through, funding that they receive through the state or state government, federal government, to get this training to build a career. These are not folks who, are just, sitting on trust funds or something that have all the time in the world. They're like, working their tails off to become, to get trained to become a truck driver. And then you say, oh, sorry, Mr. Smith, there's a 2-week delay before you can take your skills test at the DMV. That is a real problem. And some people literally have to walk away to go take a different career at that point. Their skills degrade, and they're not going to do the skills test. They can't get hired, and and so that's sort of the skills testing delay part. But that's where this is working well, because when states do utilize third-party testing, you have the ability to go take that test immediately, and it's a system where, as Jeff mentioned, enormous oversight. Right? I mean, we're talking straight up, covert audits. People with, binoculars, making sure that folks are actually doing the test properly, or, doing co-scoring, as Jeff mentioned. All those things. That's where oversight is working appropriately, and so it's, I think, a real benefit to see that in the industry. And Jeff, you're not throwing shade, but you mentioned that. But it's like, where the person conducting the examination doesn't have a CDL, that's a pretty unique circumstance, right? Like, something happens during the skills test, and the student has to stop. It's like, that examiner isn't driving the power unit back to the DMV.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just this is the thing. It's where people say common sense isn't all that common anymore. The thing, we have these conversations all the time, and I find myself sitting back and thinking, this makes no sense. How do we get to this point where so many of these things are happening that just don't make any sense? And what you're describing there is one of those situations. But, I look at this whole training conversation, and again, I think the momentum is behind it now with all the talk about English language proficiency and, again, non-domiciled CDLs and whatnot, and the attention being on the people who can actually do the enforcement and make these changes. It is encouraging, but I also think it's worth pointing out that this is not just a safety aspect. It is certainly a safety aspect when you look at training, because we want safe drivers out on the road, obviously, and you do as well. But if you were to put a greater emphasis on training, that's also going to help with retention levels, which, as we know, are low, because a lot of these folks are getting in the industry, they're not trained properly, and they just can't cut it. How much of that enters into your thinking as well, too, I suppose, when looking at all this, and again, looking at the big picture, Andrew?
Oh, that's why I think, when we're talking about these are joint missions of CVTA, opportunity and safety work together, right? And we're seeing that now in terms of, the last thing that anyone wants, whether they're an owner operator, whether, they own a fleet, they work with the school, whether they, somebody who wants to become a truck driver, the last thing we want is to, have the face of trucking be these two people, the gentleman from Florida and the gentleman from, California, that cause these horrible accidents. No, that's terrible. It's critical that the American public know about that, but that's not, my younger brother's a truck driver. I love him, more than words. And I'm so proud of him and what he does. And, that's the face of the American truck driver, my brother Mike. And it's like we have got to enforce these rules correctly. We've got to make sure that people are trained properly, because there's enormous opportunity out there. It's always been there, but these challenges that arise and some of the nonsense, non-common sense things that we've seen evolve, they just seeing them rolled back. It's sort of like it's a breath of fresh air and sort of sunlight in the room to imagine that there could be an FMCSA and a USDOT focused on safety and willing to act with urgency. Right? That's the difference. I mean, it's so refreshing. It's like, hey, we got a problem. Let's do an interim final rule that is effective immediately. Try that out. Right? Wow. How amazing. We need more of that, because that will allow, yes, in the short term, is that the case that people will go, wow, trucking has some real, or the enforcement space in trucking is really, wow, like what has been going on over there, right? And then you take that immediate hit, but then, over time, through that sunlight and that cleaning of the space, you see it start to, take shape again into what everybody that loves this industry knows.
Yeah. You got them fired up, Scott. You hear the passion. Andy, he starts to ramp up on these things for good reason. And I am lockstep there with him. One of the things I did want to mention, and that was just referring to yesterday's press conference and others, really appreciate the fact that Secretary Duffy and Administrator Bars, honed in on the essential job, the appreciation for truck drivers, and the recognition that they are literally driving the economy and making this country, flourish and run. We certainly love to hear all of that. And again, like I said earlier, we don't want any bad press to overshadow all of the good men and women that are out there that are doing it for all the right reasons. I've had my CDL since 1997. I take great pride in maintaining it. To be honest with you, I don't get out there and train as much as I used to. I'm in a different position, but I still hold all those same values. And if we just simply enforce what is currently on the books, it would go such a tremendous long way into cleaning up the industry, perhaps even cleaning up some impressions, although, they may be rooted in misconceptions, but still cleaning it up. And Scott, I dare say this, and I've used this analogy elsewhere. I am willing to bet that if this same dynamic existed for pilots or doctors or things of that nature, and there was suspect in terms of their training or credentialing, it's almost a rhetorical question, but how would those be approached? Well, we in this sector, we don't treat it any differently. 80,000 pounds of running up and down the roads, and if the person that is operating that vehicle, if there is any suspicion or if there is any degree of uncertainty as to their ability to do it and the means by which they got their CDL, I wouldn't like to be sharing the road with that person no more than I'd like to be sitting in a commercial airliner behind a pilot that has suspect credentials. I liken it in the same way.
Well, and our executive vice president, Louis Pugh, always talks about the fact that, people going to beauty school, there's more minimum requirements there than there are in a lot of cases for commercial truck drivers, which again, going back to my point about common sense maybe not being as common as it once was, it's just mind-blowing to me. However, again, kind of putting a bow on everything we're talking about, it feels like we have the right kind of momentum now. I think it is safe to say that both of you feel like we are heading in the right direction. And that is due in no small part to what CVTA is doing, obviously, and has been doing now for a few decades. So I will say thank you to both of you, Andrew and Jeff, for not just your time today, but obviously for working on this issue and making sure that the right eyes are paying attention to it. It's important that we have people like yourselves that are committed to training and safety and the things that we should be focused on. So we really appreciate it.
Grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much, Scott.
Extremely grateful, Scott. Thank you, and for all the things that you brought to the table in terms of enforcement and just simply demanding that we have the safest possible operators out there on the road. I think that is a no-brainer type of a discussion that we can all get behind.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of Trucking with OOIDA was brought to you by a dedicated team of people. That includes Jim Fetzer, Tennille Flick, and Kim Boren. You can listen to new episodes and extended interviews on your favorite podcast platform and on the OOIDA YouTube page. Please subscribe while you're there. If you've got thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Call us at 1-800-324-6856 and leave a message, or send us an email to podcast@ooida.com, and we might